Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will cover how we can assess if hypertrophy training is actually effective. So the issue is that muscle growth is very difficult to measure in the short term. Unless you are a new lifter, it is unlikely that you will see visible muscle growth in your physique on a weekly basis. Significant muscle growth is something that is more appropriate to assess over the time course of months and years, not days or weeks. This is especially true for experienced lifters who have been training consistently for multiple years already. While there are reasonably accurate ways to assess muscle growth, these tools are usually reserved for research labs and don't usually provide much practical use anyway. Even if a trainee was to theoretically use some of these advanced measurements over time, what useful information would it tell us? It may tell us that we are achieving very slight muscle growth over time, which we would already expect to be the case. So these results don't tell us how to train effectively, they just tell us the result of training. So in reality, ultra-accurate measurements of muscle growth probably don't change what we would do in practice. So rather than trying to accurately assess muscle growth, it may be more useful to use general indicators of effective training. This can allow trainees to vaguely gauge how effective their training sessions are and provide consistent feedback to make better training decisions in practice. It should be noted that these are indicators, not direct assessments of muscle growth. Let's now cover what indicators we have and how these can be used to vaguely assess the hypertrophic stimulus of the training session. The first indicator we have is the mind-muscle connection. This refers to the perceived sense of contraction of a specific muscle involved in an exercise. While this is not a direct assessment of muscle growth, a strong mind-muscle connection can be a good indicator that a muscle is being effectively trained. If trainees feel a strong sense of muscle contraction in the target muscle they are trying to train, this is a good indicator that the muscle is highly involved in the exercise. This can be used as an indicator within a training session to gauge the hypertrophic stimulus. Trainees can then adjust technique within the session to try and maximize the mind-muscle connection. The next indicator of effective training is the muscle pump. This refers to the feeling of fullness of a muscle immediately after a set of training that muscle. The pump is an accumulation of fluids in the local muscle, including blood and metabolic byproducts, so it is obviously not a direct indicator of muscle growth. While the pump is also influenced by nutritional factors, it is a good general indicator that the pumped muscle was heavily involved in that exercise. Trainees can use the pump to generally gauge which muscles were involved in a lift. If the target muscle gets a good pump from a specific exercise, then that muscle was probably trained fairly well. The next indicator we have is muscle soreness. Muscle soreness refers to the tenderness of a muscle after exercise, usually experienced in the next 1 to 2 days after the muscle was trained. Muscle soreness can occur after all different kinds of exercise, especially when the training modality is novel. This means that soreness is obviously not directly correlated with muscle growth. However, when used in the context of resistance training, muscle soreness is probably a decent indicator that a muscle was trained effectively. If we experience soreness the following day in the target muscle we were trying to train, then we were probably fairly successful at training that muscle. And the last indicator of effective hypertrophy training is improvements in lifting performance over time. As we have discussed in other videos on this channel, lifting performance is certainly not directly correlated with muscle growth, and improvements in lifting performance are not necessarily indicative of hypertrophy occurring. However, if we observe lifting performance over a long period of time, then it may be a somewhat useful indicator that our training is effectively resulting in muscle growth. This is because if we have more muscle mass, we should be able to lift more weight in the exercises involving those muscles. However, this needs to be taken with caution because there are many other factors which can influence lifting performance, such as neural adaptations, lifting technique, tempo, rest periods, acute motivation, and more. So rather than looking at lifting performance from week to week, it is best to observe trends in performance over the time course of months and years. So these 4 factors are general indicators that our training sessions are effective at promoting muscle growth. However, no single factor is meaningful enough to rely upon individually. Rather, trainees should use a combination of factors to gauge training. The more of these indicators that a trainee experiences, the higher the likelihood that your training is effective. Furthermore, not all of these indicators need to be experienced for training to be effective. Some training methods may naturally lend themselves to experiencing more of some indicators, while other methods may experience other indicators more substantially. For example, a trainee may perform a bench press to train the chest in the 6 to 8 rep range. They may not feel a strong mind-muscle connection or a significant chest pump, but they are sore the next day in the chest and are slowly improving performance over time. Although not all indicators were heavily experienced, we can still be fairly confident that this training was quite effective. This is because compound lifts generally don't experience a strong mind-muscle connection compared with isolation lifts, and the rep range used probably isn't high enough to get a significant chest pump. In another example, let's say a trainee performs a dumbbell curl to train the biceps in the 12 to 15 rep range. In this case, the trainee may experience a good mind-muscle connection and a good biceps pump, but they aren't very sore the next day and aren't seeing significant improvements in performance over time. In this case, we can also be fairly confident that the training is effective despite not all indicators being substantially present. This is because the biceps rarely get severely sore for most people, and because loads are much lighter with this exercise in this rep range, progress over time will be much slower in an absolute sense. So what practical applications can we conclude from all of this information? Firstly, muscle growth is a slow process which generally takes years to achieve significant results. This makes it very difficult to track and assess in the short term because progress is so slow. So instead of trying to use detailed measures to assess progress, it may be more practical to simply use general indicators of effective training. This can provide us with short-term feedback, which can help us make better decisions with our training practices. We can use these indicators to assess if our training is generally effective, and we can then manipulate variables to make it more effective. We can use the mind-muscle connection during a set, the muscle pump after a set, muscle soreness the following day, and lifting performance over a long-term time frame. While we may not check all of these boxes with every single exercise in every single session, the more of these we experience, the more likely it is that our training was effective. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.